So this morning I wake up and I see this speech by Janet Yellen that came out last night in the United States, and I wake up and I'm like, I can't quite believe this speech. In this speech, Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, the U.S. Treasury is in charge of assembling the Biden administration's budget. Okay, and Janet Yellen herself used to be the chairwoman of the Federal Reserve Board, which is the Federal Reserve, as you know, is the central bank of the United States. I mean, she's neck deep into finance. She should know stuff about finance and macroeconomics and all the rest of it, right? And so she gives a speech, and she's talking about inflation, and she's like, who could have known? Who could have known that this would happen? I mean, it's like, look, this woman here, she runs the Fed, so she understands perfectly well how inflation is created. She understands that the fact that the Biden administration overspent and on their stupid Build Back Better policies is what directly led to this situation of inflation. She has no excuse whatsoever. When she was chair of the Federal Reserve Board, she knew that government overspending, especially during the COVID lockdown periods, were contributing to inflation. She saw the data at a much more granular level than you or I ever would have. Because that's her job. That's the whole job of the Federal Reserve, right? And insofar as her new position as Treasury Secretary, she took this position at the very start of the Biden administration. The whole notion that the grown-ups are back in charge, right? Remember that? Well, she was the person responsible for putting together the budget, okay? And she knew that the amount of money that they were going to spend that would need to be paid for by more government debt was astronomical. You're talking trillions of dollars of what at the time people realized might be needless spending because the Biden administration had come in, the lockdowns because of the vaccine were winding down. It seemed that the American economy was gearing back up. But no, Janet Yellen decided, that they're going to just put steroids into the American economy and see what happens. Well, now we know you're getting inflation like there's no tomorrow, man, right? I mean, people from accounts, they are seeing price rises of like 10 to 20% week over week. Dude, that's Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe type inflation, man. And they are seeing that, and it's freaking the hell out of them. Of course it would. Because it's obscene, and she is the woman responsible. That's the thing. She's acting like, who could have known? It's a mystery. It's a mystery, this inflation. Where did it come from? It's like a bolt out of the blue. I'm looking up at the sky to see where the inflation is coming from. Why am I pissed off? Well, because I'm seriously pissed off. Well, because you see, this inflation affects everybody. It certainly affects me. Because I've got a lot of my money in stuff that is affected by inflation, let alone the cash situation. Because what happens also when you get inflation, paradoxically, a lot of assets start to lose value as people cash them out because they need the cash in order to buy other stuff. And this past, fall dip in the market over this past May, that's part of the reason. So paradoxically, with more inflation, those of us with assets of various sorts actually lose money, not just on the inflation front, but on the diminishing prices that those assets can fetch in the open market. So you see what's going on. For a lot of people, such as myself, it's a double whammy. For people on a fixed income, it's just a whammy and a half all on its own, right? I mean, this is all kinds of, this is a problem, inflation. And the thing is, see, it's self-inflicted. Because in 73 and 79, the inflation that hit the dollar in those two opportunities, they were external shocks. They were external shocks in the sense that they were both caused by sudden upswings in the price of oil. 73 was because of the creation of OPEC and they're slamming the prices of oil. And 79 was because of the coup that overthrew the Shah of Iran. Those were, exogenous events. But these were self-created. What's going on now? This was done by Janet Yellen. It was done by the Biden administration. Janet Yellen, who's now saying that, who could have known? We didn't expect it. It's a shock to the American economy. She was the one who made it happen with her policies that she knew were going to have these consequences. And maybe she didn't believe this, but a lot of people were telling her. And now she's just like pretending like, who could have known? Who could have known? It's a mystery. Too much of American leadership and European leadership too, Western democracy leadership, right, is all about, who could have known? And everybody with a little bit of just, could have known. Everybody. And in fact, people did say what was going to happen. It's not a mystery, okay? It's not a mystery. It's not something that just came out of the blue. And you got to understand, see, the spending package that was passed by the Biden administration, it was obscene. And it went to pay off a bunch of people. See, a lot of commentators have said this. I think it might have been Tocqueville was the first who said it, but I'm not sure. It doesn't really matter. He said, or they said, someone said, that a democracy starts to collapse when the people realize that they can vote themselves endless amounts of money. Very, very true. And so the political party in the United States, when they figure, well, we can vote ourselves endless amounts of money, we just have to run it through the national credit card. The national credit card is, of course, treasury bonds. The government sells treasury bonds. These are debt instruments and gets cash. And with this cash goes and does whatever, spends on whatever stupid program, on Build Back Better. And so what has happened is that we have finally reached a point where the people in leadership positions are so irresponsible that they have fallen for this this aphorism that a democracy kills itself, commits suicide, when the people realize that they can vote themselves endless amounts of money. This is what's happening now. There's no solution to this inflation problem, okay? And this is Weimar Germany shit. The Federal Reserve and the government, the Biden administration, they're juggling balls to keep it all still up in the air. But I'll tell you right now, and anybody serious, hand to heart, will tell you the exact same thing. There is no solution to the inflation problem. It's going to get worse and worse and worse until it becomes catastrophic. And I'm talking about dollar inflation, but also euro inflation and sterling pound inflation. These currencies in the West are all going to collapse in the next 18 months. You should be looking at Weimar Germany. You should be looking at their experience, because their experience is exactly the same as the current experience. The only difference is that Weimar Germany was forced to make wartime reparations, and that's why they printed money, because they needed to get cash to pay off the reparations that were forced on them by the Treaty of Versailles. And you start looking at Weimar Germany and you start looking at the inflation curve. And at first it started very moderately, like now, because the inflation that's being experienced now is very moderate compared to other economies historically. In places that I myself have lived in, in like Ecuador and Chile, where I lived, where I saw inflation firsthand, how the currency lost value month after month, sometimes week by week, as starting to happen in the United States. I saw it, and the inflation that we're talking about in the West is very modest when you compare it to those countries. They're talking about like 8 to 10% inflation. That's bullshit. The only country whose numbers I believe are the Netherlands. The Dutch are the only ones who are honest about their numbers, and they're already talking about 12, 13% inflation, okay? The other countries, they're doing statistical magic so that it doesn't become that obvious insofar as the number is concerned. The Dutch are being true. And they, a couple of months ago, were saying, 12, 14%, right? God alone knows what it is now in Holland, which is
Holland is, the Netherlands rather, is a competently run country. Unlike all the other European countries, the Netherlands is the only country that pre-COVID had a positive balance of payment and a positive government budget. See, they run things properly in the Netherlands. That's why it's such a wonderful country in so many ways. But the rest of Europe, it's all a basket case, and that includes Germany. Okay, and I'm 3/8 German, and I can tell you that the Germans are a fucking basket case. Okay, and so what I'm saying is that, see, all of this inflation, it's gearing up across the West. And I think personally, we will look back on the sanctions and realize that that was the starting point. It was brewing from before, no question. But it's going to be exacerbated by the effects of the sanctions. Or perhaps the sanctions will just be seen, like I said, like things that exacerbated the situation. Not, why am I arguing about how history will see it in the future? That's stupid. Let's focus on the here and now and Weimar Germany. That's what I want to focus on. Yeah. So let me focus on that. Look at the curve of the Reichsmark and how it fared insofar as inflation is concerned during Weimar Germany. Look at it. Look at it carefully. Look at the curve. It started small. And for quite a surprising amount of time, it was fairly moderate. You look at the curve, right? And it was, 15%, dipping up to 25, and then down to, 17, and for a while, for a lot of months, okay? And then all of a sudden, it started going up and up and up and up, and parabolic, man, to the moon. Yeah. That's what's going to happen with the dollar and the euro and pound sterling, okay? Yen, I don't know. I haven't really looked into it. For purposes of this conversation, it's not very important. Most of my audience is not in Japan. Most of my audience is in the West. And I'm telling you, end of 2023, it's going to be a fucking nightmare. Okay? I'm talking, wheelbarrows full of money. Because, see, that's the thing about Janet Yellen's speech that really triggered me. These people don't know what the hell they're doing. I try to take people at face value. When they tell me something, I tend to believe them. I tend to think, they're not lying to me. They're not trying to, crook me. They're not trying to play 5D chess or any nonsense like that. They're telling me what more or less that they think. And the thing is, see, I think that Janet Yellen actually is surprised by this inflation. I think that she's such an idiot. She really is. Okay, because when you look at her policies as chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, she was a disaster. But anyway, the thing is, see, they don't know what they're doing. And so they're going to be doubling down on their own policies because they won't be able to admit that they're wrong, or they won't be able to say, this is the medicine that needs to be taken and it's going to hurt, but we need to do it to save the ship. I'm mixing my metaphors, but you understand the sentiment. Back in 1980, Paul Volcker, the then chairman of the Federal Reserve, he knew exactly what had to be done to kill the inflation sparked by the Iranian Revolution. He hit the brakes hard insofar as interest rates. He cranked them up to over 20% at one point, and dude, the federal funds rate, 20%, right up to, they talk about right up to 11, fuck that, right up to 20. Holy cow, right? And that hurt. It hurt like a son of a bitch. It caused up to that point, the most massive recession since the Great Depression. But it halted inflation in its tracks. And the dollar has been fairly stable since 82. And there have been other exogenous factors that aren't important for this conversation. But he's the guy who did it. And now the American economy and the Western economies are far weaker than in 82. Because back in 82, there was actual manufacturing going on. See? And you got to understand, when you have a recession and people start going bankrupt, right? I own a factory and I produce widgets and I go broke. What do? I auction off my factory. The factory is not destroyed. It doesn't vanish. It still exists. I just auction it off to pay my debts because I'm bankrupt, right? And so once I auction it off, somebody else owns it. You own it. And you take it, and you bought it, on maybe 60 cents on the dollar, maybe 40 cents on the dollar. And you buy it and you start making widgets once again, and you start making money. And for you, it's a great deal because you bought it at 40 cents off the dollar on the dollar from me, and now you're making money hand over fist, right? I mean, all good for you, right? That in a recessionary environment is what happens when you have a manufacturing economy. But when you have a service-oriented economy, like for instance, I provide some service, I have some app that delivers food or some nonsense like that, right? I go broke, and what do? I shut down everything. And that app, poof, it's gone. That's the problem with a service-oriented economy. When people start going bankrupt, the service that they are providing ceases to exist. There's nothing tangible. It's a service. It's not a factory. It's not a good. It ceases to exist. And you see what happens. You see what happens when a serious recession hits a service-oriented economy. It very quickly morphs into a depression. And everybody's unemployed. And it becomes a self-reinforcing spiral. And all of the economy just goes down the drains. This is a longer video than I intended, but I want you to understand the shape of why I'm so concerned and freaked out about this fucking speech by this fucking idiot, Janet Yellen. See? Understand what's going on.